Good morning. Good morning. This is Valerie Leonard. I am the founder of nonprofit Utopia. I want to welcome you to today's discussion. We're going to be talking about collaboration. And if you can just give me a minute, I want to pull up our presentation and we could go from there. Okay, I'm trying to go back and get my presentation. Ideally, this would show me and the presentation. Just a moment. I guess it would help if I would share my screen. Yeah, just one minor detail. Sorry about that. Yeah, I was. All righty. Okay, so I apologize for that. We are now ready to get started. As you may or may not know, we are focusing on the month of February. We're focusing on collaboration. We will be looking at all types of collaboration, from very informal groups all the way up to mergers and I don't want to say acquisitions, we'll say affiliations with the nonprofits. So before we get started, I do want to invite you to download our workbook. We have a workbook that I think will be really, really helpful for you to follow along. So you don't have a binder, but once you download it, you can put it in a binder. And you can use this workbook to follow along with the discussion, take notes as well. But most importantly, you can do some of the assignments after we're done, right? So there are a number of questions and answers that you can use to explore. And then you can also do a partnership analysis and structure your partnership based on the skills of people that you want to bring to the party. And then there is a checklist here where you can actually vet your potential members. And we'll go through that during the presentation. I just want to give you time to download and print it out, and you can take some notes as we go along. And then after we're done and after you do your due diligence, you will ask yourself, is it worth it? What are the pros? What are the cons of collaboration? Do I still want to go through it? And, the questions in it, I think, are very good for self-reflection and to help you map out your strategy. So I'm not going to focus on this book right about now, but I'm hoping you did have enough time to print out the workbook so that you can, in fact, follow along. If not, there is a link that you can go to at another time. It's in a box folder. All right. And I have also included links to a number of other articles and some of our upcoming workshops. And I'm sorry, some of our upcoming crowdcasts. The next one will be on Tuesday, February 18th at 10 o'clock. We will be talking about collective impact. So today we're just talking about various forms of collaboration and giving you some pointers on collaboration. Next week, we're going to talk about collective impact, which will be looking at ways different organizations that do different things can come together and create an interdisciplinary group that will focus on larger problems in a single geography. And that could be a community, it could be a city, it could be a state. So we'll be talking about some strategy you can to create a structure where you can work efficiently and account for all of the wonderful outcomes that you're going to have. And then on next Friday, we'll actually talk about the document itself, the MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, and we'll take it beyond the basics. Most of the documents that I see are very, very basic, and they might satisfy minimal requirements that a funder may have. But truth be told, working with numbers of people can be a very complex undertaking, to say the least. And you need to, think about, how you're going to work together and try to anticipate issues that might come up that could keep you from moving forward. So I think it's really important that we talk about that next week. And then the following Friday, on the 28th, we're going to talk about how technology can actually facilitate your collaboration. So we'll review a few online tools that you may or may not have heard about that will help you do project management and track some of your outcomes, so you can tell all the wonderful work that you're doing and prove that the work is being done. So without further ado, we're going to dive in today, and we're going to talk about the major phases of nonprofit collaboration. And if you have any questions, by all means, post in the chat room. In fact, you should post in the chat room just to let me know that you're here. And for those of you who are watching on YouTube Live, if you're watching on Facebook Live, you do have an opportunity to join us here in Crowdcast. I believe I left the link on those pages, and if you don't see it, you can join us here live in Crowdcast right now, so that you can download some of those handouts. And we're at crowdcast.io/lowercase e THE -major -stages -of. Alrighty, so we're talking about the major stages of nonprofit collaboration. All right, before we get started, as usual, I want to tell you a little about Nonprofit Utopia. We're the ideal community for emerging nonprofit leaders, and we have created a safe space where folks can talk about some of the issues of concern to them, and they can also innovate. And ideally, I want to create an environment where you have more seasoned professionals as well as the younger professionals learning from one another. And our mission is to develop the next generation of ethical nonprofit leaders. And just bear with me, I gotta get back into our presentation. And again, we want to create superior networking experiences, both online as well as in the real space. And our overarching goal of the community is to give our members the tools that they need to not only develop themselves, but develop sustainable organizations in the process. So our vision is to strengthen the global nonprofit sector by providing training and development opportunities for over 50,000 people. And these would be emerging leaders in nonprofit throughout the world. And we want to do that by 2033. And if you want to know more about us, you can visit nonprofitutopia.com, or you can go to nonprofitutopia.mn.co. And for those of you who are watching from within Crowdcast, there's a little green button that you can click. It says Join Nonprofit Utopia. Don't do that while we're doing the webinar, but you can do that after the webinar. You can learn more about us. So a little bit about myself. I am a consultant in nonprofit management. I also focus on community development. I'm also on staff at the University of Illinois in their certificate in nonprofit management program, and I'm on staff at Roosevelt University teaching social ventures. So I've got a number of experiences from the business world as well as nonprofit that really complement one another. I have a master's degree in finance from Kellogg, and I also have an undergrad degree in economics from Spelman College. So now when we talk about collaboration, we know, as I mentioned before, that it can take on many forms. And depending on the circumstances or where you are in your life cycle, this could be as simple as producing a 1-hour program right after school or something like that, or as complex as a full merger. And what we're going to do today, we're going to talk about various forms and structures of collaboration, and this is going to include your legal forms as well as your more informal, and we'll talk about formal partnerships, joint ventures, as well as mergers. And we'll also talk about when it's most appropriate to use each of these tools. And we also will have links, as you can see. We have links to various articles and resources, as well as links to download this workbook. So we got a lot to cover. We'll get about a half hour or so of instruction. You'll have an opportunity to ask questions. In fact, you can start asking questions in the live chat room right now if you'd like. If you want to come up on screen, I can do that. Just let me know in live chat and I can pull you forward and people can see you as you talk, and we can do that during the Q&A. You will also have downloadable handouts that will be in the form of our workbook. And I guarantee you, if you get through those exercises, you'll have a much clearer idea of what it is you want from your collaboration. And then you'll also be able to walk away with a recording of this webinar that you can refer to from time to time in case there's something that you missed the first go around. And I encourage you, this is a free webinar. It's information that's very vital to making sure that we have collaborations that work. So I encourage you to share it. Share the link to this webinar in your networks. If you're watching live on Facebook, I encourage you to host a watch party and share the link on pages of your friend. If you are watching this on YouTube live, please feel free to comment. I can't see what you're writing right now, but if you leave comments, I'll make sure that I come back to you as soon as I can. And please, I ask you as well, share the link to the YouTube live in your networks. If you're watching Facebook live, please share the link in your network. So we're going to talk about informal strategic alliances. Most often we say we're going to partner with people, we're going to build coalitions, and for our purposes, we're going to call them strategic alliances. And these are informal partnerships, and these are groups of individuals or groups of organizations that have come together to develop either a new initiative, a new program, work on a new project. And regardless of what type of partnership it is, whether it's informal or formal, you're going to have ground rules. So the more informal ones are going to usually have informal ground rules, ways of thinking about things, ways of approaching things. They'll have handbooks and/or memoranda of understanding. Some informal partnerships might even consider drafting bylaws and rules and regulations, just to make sure everything is very clear. And you would use those informal partnerships, for example, if you wanted to pursue a proposal, a funding proposal, where the funder is looking for evidence that more than one person or more than one group is going to work on this. You might pursue informal partnerships where you see that there are complementary skills of different individuals or different groups, and you want to address needs in a community, but you might not want to have a long-term commitment, and this could be for an initiative that might last, say, 3 months, 6 months, a year or so. So those would be some examples when you might want to do an informal partnership. Or, there may be a coalition of people who are doing the census, or a coalition of people who are doing voter registration. Those are, again, examples where you might use informal partnerships, but you just really want to make sure that it's clear, how the work is going to be divvied up, what the roles and responsibilities are, and all that good stuff. So moving on to formal partnerships, a partnership is actually a legal entity, and it's a formal arrangement by two or more parties to manage and operate a business and share its profits. And there are several types of partnership arrangements, and I got that definition from Investopedia. And you might be asking yourself, well, this is nonprofit collaboration. Why are we talking about formal partnerships and money to be made and all that good stuff? Well, in some instances, your partnership might actually be a nonprofit entity. In some cases, your partnership might actually be a for-profit entity where you are dividing up the actual profits. As a nonprofit, you can't do that. But and when I say you can't do that, you can't divide any profits. Any so-called profits would need to go back into the nonprofits. But if you have a for-profit entity, which would be this partnership, then if there are any profits to be made, those would be split, equitably among the partners. And you find this arrangement to be very common in affordable housing when there are low, I'm sorry, low income housing tax credits involved. That is one arrangement. The nonprofit might create several partnerships with different investors on different projects. Another even more formal partnership is a joint venture. That is where you are creating a separate entity again, and it could take on the form of a corporation, either for profit or nonprofit. And this is where two entities come together, and they could be for profit or nonprofit, and they come together to create something new, right? To have a new program, a new product, a new service, and that thing is governed by the two entities that will retain their own operations. They retain their own separate identities. The only thing that they really have in common is this one joint venture. And companies do this quite often, and you're finding more and more nonprofits that are doing joint ventures. And usually this is done to share various audiences. The two organizations may have audiences that each one wants to exploit, right? They may want to gain scale and create efficiencies, or they might want to make sure that they can augment one another's skills. And again, this is happening more and more in nonprofit. I've worked with a couple agencies that were working to do joint profits, and in one case, there were two agencies that came together to do a joint venture for youth housing. And this entity that focused on housing was controlled jointly by the two through their board. So you have board members from each of the organizations that were governing this joint venture that was focused on youth housing for emancipated minors. And then the highest form is mergers. And mergers are literally where you have or two organizations, coming together to create one entity. So rather than in a joint venture status, so with the joint venture, you had two organizations that maintain their own separate identities, they maintain their own assets, and they just came together to create this one entity that will actually house the project, right? In a merger, you have 1 plus 1 equals 1. So you got two organizations that are coming together to create a separate new thing, right? So an example of this is when GuideStar merged, I'm sorry, merged with the Foundation Center, and they became Candid. So you no longer have GuideStar, you no longer have Candid, except that they are now divisions of. I'm sorry, you no longer have GuideStar, you no longer have the Foundation Center, and they have both ceased from being their own separate entities to now they're divisions of Candid. And you could figure out different ways of how you want to come together and what it's going to look like, but that is what GuideStar and the Foundation Center decided to do. They both wanted to make sure that they could preserve brands, preserve the brand awareness that they had from the Foundation Center, preserve the brand awareness that they had under GuideStar, but they are now one entity under Candidate, two separate divisions. All right, so now I want to share some of my tips for collaboration. And this is based on experiences I've had, some positive experiences, some negative experiences, and also some reading of best practices. So pull all of that stuff together to distill into 8 tips for collaboration. And I'm sure you have tips of your own. And if you do, please share while we're going along. If you have comments as I talk, please post those either Facebook Live, on YouTube Live, or in the chat room. And I will address as many of those questions as possible while we're here. And if we run out of time, I will be sure to follow up with you. If you're watching from Facebook Live, if you're watching from YouTube, I can't see what you're writing. I will follow up with any questions or comments that you might have. And I also invite you to join us here right now in Crowdcast. We're at crowdcast.io /e/ and these are all lowercase letters, the major stages of. So we're talking about the major stages of collaboration, and we're here in Crowdcast. And if you're watching on Facebook Live or YouTube Live, you are welcome to join us and comment, and you will have access to all the downloads that you can use to help you flesh out your own collaborations at home. So again, we're talking about 8 tips for collaboration, and I'll be really, really interested in hearing what some of your tips have been. So tip number 1, you want to understand your self-interest. And the first thing is you're going to ask yourself, what are your motivations behind collaboration at this time? Is your motivation actually, is it driven by the funder? Is there a funding opportunity and that makes it attractive for you to go out and bring other partners? Is it because you see a problem that's larger than what you can handle as an organization? So for example, you're a housing organization and your job is to deal with housing, but you notice as you deal with affordable housing, the people that are renting from you or buying from you, they may have other complex issues. So it might be advantageous for you to collaborate with other organizations where you can make referrals. So what's driving that need for you to partner? What are you expecting to gain from the collaboration? And be honest with yourself. What do you want to gain from this professionally as an individual? Are there skills for you to gain? Are you trying to promote a professional reputation? Are you trying to promote your organization as a thought leader? Um, so, what is it that you really want to gain from collaboration? Is it more efficiency? Is it more revenue? Is it experience working in an area that you haven't had experience in? And what are you prepared to give to the collaboration? What are you prepared to give to the collaborating partners? Because in the best of all worlds, this is not going to be a give and take. I give and you take. In the best of all worlds, every member of the collaboration is, in fact, giving something to the collaboration. What are your needs? How is this partnership going to help you to meet those needs? So, again, is that need for more experience? Is it a need for more exposure? Is it a need to develop your skills? And then, what are your deal breakers? What are those absolute things that you cannot live with that will keep you from entering into this proposed partnership, or will keep you from selecting person XYZ or organization ABC to collaborate with you? And most importantly, regardless of whether you're working with friends or organizations that you've worked with before, have you spoken with an attorney to understand what the legalities, what the risks are, and how you mitigate those risks? How do you protect yourself as you enter into collaboration? And not only how do you protect yourself, how do you protect your clients? How do you protect your organizations? Tip number 2, understand your self-worth, right? What compensation are you expecting, if any? Right now you might be starting off and everybody's on equal footing. There's no money, but what happens when money comes in? How are you expecting to be compensated? How are you expecting to compensate the people that you're working with? Will it be cash compensation? Will it be through other in-kind resources? Will it be through referrals? You really, really need to be clear on that, so that you're not disappointed down the road when people don't adequately compensate you. Tip number 3, understand the self-interest, values, motivations of everyone else that you're considering working with. Just like you had to go through that whole analysis trying to get a better feel for what it is that motivates you, what it is that you plan to get out of it, what are you preparing to give. You ask those same questions of those people that you are thinking about working with. You want to get a feel for whether or not this is a good fit. And ideally, you want to know whether or not this is a good fit before you get into the collaboration. And again, have they talked with an attorney? Should your attorneys be talking to one another? What do they need? Tip number 4, don't let funding proposals be the only factor that determines the terms and the scope of your collaboration. As I mentioned before, sometimes there may be a funding source that is, asking that you work together, that you collaborate. And sometimes they'll even give you a form of an MOU and ask you to follow it and then fill out that form and submit that with the proposal. 9 times out of 10, that's just a very, very general form, and it has the bare minimum. But what you really, really need to do, and this should happen ideally before you go into any collaboration where you're seeking funds, ideally you want to flesh out what that collaboration looks like, right? So you want to solidify the terms and conditions under which you're going to work, and that might be a little bit more than what's required by the funder, because the funder has their own interest for certain terms being in the MOU, but you're going to have your own interest, and every partner who is part of this collaboration has their own interest to protect. So that's going to take a while to really, really hammer out, and it could take significantly longer than the time it's going to take in order for you to submit that proposal. Because, let's be honest, usually when we're responding to proposals, we might have 2 weeks to respond, 4 weeks max, sometimes 2 days to respond. And it's just not possible to have all of that stuff together unless you've been talking probably for months on end, fleshing this stuff out. So this may take a little bit longer, but I guarantee you it will probably increase the chances of your long-term sustainability as a partnership, because you've taken the time to really think it through. You've taken the time to learn one another. You've taken the time to really understand what's important to you and what the deal breakers are. And you need to be clear on the roles, the responsibilities, and the commitments of each partner, as well as the compensation. You want to make sure that everybody is fairly compensated for the contributions that he or she makes to this collaboration. Alrighty, so here is an example, and you'll find this on page 6 of the workbook. And if you're here in Crowdcast with us live, you can download the workbook, and at your leisure, you can do the exercises. And on page 6, you will find this grid, and you don't have to use it in its exact form. You could feel free to tailor this to whatever your needs are, but it's a list of your proposed partners. You want to look at what their skill sets are if you're looking at individuals. And if you're looking at organizations, you want to look at what their core competencies. So when we talk about core competencies, we want to talk about, what is this organization known for? What are they good at? What are their programs? What are their services, right? And then you want to identify roles and responsibilities. And you might even go so far as thinking about a very high level job description for these people. And as you finalize your agreement, you might want to have a more detailed job description for each partner. And then, one of the most important columns is the commitment to the partnership. Everybody can't afford to commit the same amount of time. And their role may not even require the same amount of time as everyone else. But you want to make sure that they're willing to commit the time, the resources, whether they're financial resources, whether they're human resources, whether they're other resources. So you want to get a commitment on paper as to what they're willing to do, right? And then you want to also have a really good meeting of the minds as to what compensation is going to be for each one of the partners. And compensation may vary from funding opportunity to funding opportunity, because you might have situations where, one agency is the lead agency in one instance, and then in another instance, they may be supporting a lead agency. But you really, really want to have some general language as to how people are going to be compensated as they participate. Tip number 5, you want to vet everyone with whom you intend to collaborate, including those people that you've worked with before. And the reason why I say that is because you work with people in one instance does not mean that you'll have the same experience, good or bad, in another situation. You may have certain roles that may not be as in depth in one situation as it will be or could be in this potential collaboration. So it's really important for you to have good discussions with potential collaborative partners to find out more about them. also to talk with other people who may have worked with them. So here's a sample checklist for vetting potential partners, and you'll find this in the workbook as well. And this is a checklist that you might want to modify for your own purposes, but I think it's a good idea to understand the financial position of each one of your partners. I had a chance where I partner with one group without checking out their financial status. And about a year or two into the collaboration, it became painfully apparent that they did not have the financial wherewithal to do this project. And I was unpleasantly surprised, and I kicked myself because that's not something that I advise people to do professionally. I'm a professional. I work with nonprofits and I work with them to help them avoid silly mistakes. But because I had an existing relationship with this group, I just assumed that they were financially stable, right? So you will want to look at their financial statements. They don't necessarily have to be audited, but they should be reasonably easy to follow. Look at the statements for the prior 3 years and understand what those statements are telling you, whether or not they're on sound financial footing. What are the trends? Are they improving financially? Are there consistent losses? You want to look at their Form 990 for the past 3 years and ask the partners outright if you can look at their Form 990s and see what they say. A big red flag is if they hesitate to give you those 990s. But you can always go to GuideStar, you can go to the IRS website, and you can look at those Form 990s for yourself, whether they give them to you or not. Just know that by law, they should give those documents to you on demand. And when I say those documents, I'm talking about things like the 1023, which is their original application for tax exempt status, and for the Form 990. Again, if they hesitate to give it to you, that is cause for pause. It doesn't have to be a deal breaker, but just wonder why they're so hesitant to give that information to you. You also want evidence that the organization has filed reports with all state regulatory agencies, particularly the Attorney General's office and the Secretary of State. You want to make sure that they're in good standing. Why is this important? Because in the event that this collaboration is successful, and I know it's going to be successful, and they get money, you want to be able to give them the money, right? And most funding agencies are not going to give money to organizations that are not in good standing with the state. It's just that simple. And if you are in a situation where you want to partner with someone and that group or their organization has not um, filed the proper forms, depending on what the relationship is, on one hand, you might say, no, they can't partner with us. On another hand, it might just be a capacity issue. And if it's a capacity issue that you want to help with, you might lend your expertise helping your potential partners to come up to speed. You want to also do your own homework, so you want to review information that's publicly available. So you might want to do a Google search, look at any public documents that might give you some sense of this organization, what their culture is, what they've been able to achieve over time. And if there have been any red flags, those might come up as well. And you really, really want evidence that the organization has support from their board to participate in this project, right? You don't want to be in a position where someone from the organization who doesn't have the authority to make decisions has obligated the organization, and then you find out that the board has no knowledge of this partnership whatsoever. So you want to be sure, be clear that they do in fact, have the permission and the authority, right? And you want to also understand what their track record is in providing services, right? Because everybody wants to work with people who are going to pull their weight and who are going to make a positive contribution to the performance of this potential collaboration. And it's always a good thing to do a reference check, even if you have worked with organizational leaders before. Like I said, you may have worked with people in one context that didn't require as deep a collaboration as the collaboration that you're contemplating, and people respond differently at a distance than they do up close and personally, and especially if that up close and personal experience includes maybe some conflict or and when I say conflict, I'm not talking about arguments with people. I'm talking about challenges within the organization. And you want to understand how those people respond to challenge. Are they the type of people who, when challenged with something that's not pleasant, do they shut down and not share information whatsoever? Or are they people who are transparent and they address the challenges head on? Because let's be clear, when you're collaborating with people, and even if you're working by yourself, you're always going to have challenges. There's no such thing as doing this work without good experiences, without bad experiences. And you want to know that if you are, if you got your back to the wall, right? That the people that you're collaborating with are going to have your back and they're going to be with you and not leave you on the field, so to speak. Tip number 6, you want to determine the legal structure of your collaboration. So again, this could be an informal partnership or what we would call a strategic alliance. It could be a formal partnership. It could be an LLC. It could be a joint venture, which could be a for-profit joint venture, or it could be a non-for-profit joint venture, or it could be a merger. Again, you might want to look at for the informal partnerships and strategic alliances, this would be where the level of risk is very, very low, right? This would be for maybe collaborating on putting together a webinar or a 2-hour program or something like that. Or if you are putting together a coalition to do voter registration and you'll be together for, say, 6 months or whatever. But the more you have at risk, the tighter your documents need to be. If it's an informal partnership, you might consider having a real contract. Remember, MOU is not legally binding, but a contract is. So we'll talk about that next week. So be sure and register for our workshop, or shall I say our webinar for next week, where we talk about the MOUs, and that's going to be on February 28th. Sorry, not February 28th, February 21st. Again, February 21st, we'll be talking about MOUs. Alrighty, and then your partnership agreements, as I mentioned before, a typical case where you might come into a partnership agreement is if you're doing affordable housing and you might have some deals where there's low-income housing tax credits, and from project to project, you create separate partnership agreements with your investors. Another case where you might have a partnership agreement is when there are 2 or 3 entities who come together in a formal way and they create a formal entity that is called this partnership. There was an entity back in the day that was called the Westside Health Partnership, and those organizations came together. There were 3 organizations that came together to have social services in the North Lawndale community. And I could have the name wrong, but it was similar. Yeah. there was a partnership of 3 hospitals that came together, and I believe it was the Westside Health Partnership, but I could be wrong. I'm thinking I'm wrong, but I think you get the deal. You can have an LLC, and that comes into play in those cases when, for example, and this is not the only example, for example, you um, you have a social venture that you might want to start, a for-profit social venture. You want to keep your nonprofit, but you might have a social enterprise you might want to create. So depending on what your attorney says, you might consider an LLC or even an L3C, which is a hybrid between a nonprofit and a for-profit. A joint venture, again, that could be a for-profit or a nonprofit joint venture. That comes into play when 2 organizations come together to create a separate entity that will provide a program, product, or a service. And there's a specific purpose for that. They have only come together. This entity has only come together for that one purpose, right? And that could be a corporation, it could be an LLC or what, but the key is it's a joint venture, and it's governed by either a set of contracts where there is a board, sorry, a set of contracts that create the rules and regs, or it's a board, and this is more common, a board that governs what happens with this new entity, and that board has membership from both organizations so that they can both jointly control this venture. And then there's the merger. Again, the merger might happen when there are 2 organizations that want to accomplish something larger outside themselves. And sometimes this could be because market conditions are so competitive that it really doesn't make sense for the 2 organizations to remain separate. They form their own corporation, and a nonprofit can be a corporation. And again, the example was that I gave you was Candid, where you had GuideStar coming together with the Center for Philanthropy, and they came together to create Candid. Alrighty, and then tip number 7, have an exit strategy. That is, you want to know how you're going to get out of this thing before you even get into it, right? So you want to think about how long this partnership is going to last, how formal is it going to be, what are you trying to accomplish, what are the goals, and what are those triggering events that are going to cause you to wind it down. One triggering event hopefully will be that you have accomplished everything that you set out to accomplish, and there's no need to stick around anymore. All right. Other triggering events could be that things are going not so well, right? And you had in your mind certain triggers. We have to accomplish X, Y, Z as a group. Otherwise, I'm out of here. Otherwise, my organization is out of here. So if you feel that things are not progressing, or if there is a difference in your values versus the organization's values, then you might consider coming out of that, right? So again, what triggering events will cause your organization to come out, right? And you should probably have some of those instances in your document, right? And then what activities are you going to have to engage in as you wind this thing down? If it's an informal partnership, that's pretty simple. You really don't have to do a whole heck of a lot to transition out. That in many instances just requires a closeout meeting, or if you're bowing out and the organization or the collaboration continues, you want to make sure that there's a smooth transition between yourself and your organization and the remaining members. But if you have created a joint venture, for example, which is a legal entity, in many instances it's a legal corporation, then that is going to involve another more rigorous set of activities. If you have a merger and you decide to wind down, or maybe the merger itself is the exit strategy. Maybe they're two organizations that love each other so much. The Foundation Center and is the name of the organization. You heard me stumbling over it before in the last slide, but Candid is the result of the merger of the Foundation Center and GuideStar. And that merger didn't happen overnight. They had a long-standing relationship, and they really, really enjoyed working with one another. GuideStar tended to focus on organizations, where the Foundation Center tended to focus on the foundation members, so the grant makers. And they thought it would be a good idea to create an organization where there's this one long continuum between organizations and foundations, and it will serve the needs of both. And in so doing, they have created something that has synergy, which means that the resulting organization can do more as one organization than the two could separately. But if they wanted to wind down, they would have a whole complex set of activities in which they would need to engage so that they could go out of business. And as nonprofits, one of those things would be to make sure that they transfer their assets to a nonprofit organization. So I say all of that to say is your exit strategy is going to vary based on what the project is, how complex your partnership is, and at what stage it is in terms of formality and organization. Tip number 8, and this is one of the most important, you want to make sure that you establish ground rules for participation. So regardless of how simple or how complex the collaboration is, whether it's a two-person collaboration trying to explore whether or not they want to even do a nonprofit organization, all the way up into a merger, you're going to need to have ground rules. And usually this surrounds things like your mission, your vision, goals and objectives, core values, roles and responsibilities of every member of the collaboration. How are you going to hold people accountable? How are you going to make decisions? What is the structure of the flow of work? How are you going to manage the finances? What are you trying to achieve, right? How are you going to track the outcomes? Who actually owns the intellectual property that is developed during the collaboration? There's some collaborations where the entities are not really legal entities. They're just individuals. And in the meantime, you're developing all this intellectual property. Who owns that intellectual property? What happens when this collaboration dissolves, or what happens when this collaboration becomes more formal? Who then owns the intellectual property? How is it going to be protected? How are you going to resolve conflicts? And what's the exit strategy for the collaboration? All of this stuff you need to really, really think through at the beginning. Why do you think about it at the beginning? Because inevitably, whenever you get more than one person in the room, conflict arises, right? Or there may be unforeseen circumstances that you didn't think about, and you want to be able to anticipate how you're going to handle those circumstances. And you want to be able to anticipate that while everybody still loves each other. So in the event that there is some tension, you have ways to resolve conflict in a manner, hopefully in a manner, people may not all be happy, but they'll feel like they've been heard. They'll feel like they've been treated fairly. So some of the components, again, we talked about the mission, vision, and core values. And quite honestly, this is the same slide, different format. And also, very important, we want to document everything, right? So depending on the legal structure and the complexity of the project or program, the terms of the collaboration can be documented in terms of a memorandum of understanding. It could actually be just a handwritten list of things that you will and will not do, right? A contract. It could be a handbook, policies and procedures, and even bylaws. And whatever the rules are, they need to be developed and approved by the partners. And, if it's anything like bylaws, they really should be reviewed by an attorney, because bylaws are what? Subject to the laws of your state, and they need to be in alignment with the laws of the state. So that brings me to the end of this presentation. I'm going to open up for questions. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, please feel free to share in the chat room. For those of you who are listening on YouTube, if you have any questions or comments, please post in the comments section. I will get you the answers just as soon as possible. If you want copies of this workbook so that you can flesh out your own partnerships, I strongly recommend that you sign up for this webinar. We're going to have a recording here, and you'll still be able to access all of the handouts, even if you have not yet signed on to Crowdcast yet. And if you are a member of the nonprofit Utopia community, I will make sure that you have this recording as well as the links to this workbook. Excuse me. All righty. It doesn't look like there are any questions, and bear with me. If you have questions that you have later, you can email me at ValerieFLeonard@nonprofitutopia.com. I am so sorry. And if you are a member of Nonprofit Utopia, you can post in the forum and I will gladly answer your questions. So I'm about to lose my voice and I think I need to sign off. We've been here about an hour now. Alrighty, so I shall talk to you later. Again, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to post in the chat room. Feel free to email me. Alrighty, until next week, take care. And remember, on the 18th, we'll be talking about collective impact, and that's looking at ways groups of different organizations can tackle complex problems in their community, in their city, in their state, or even nationwide. We're going to share with you some models as well as case studies and some tools so that you can try this at home. So until next week, you take care. Bye-bye. Thank you, Leslie. I appreciate that. Leslie Piper has indicated that she thought that this was well organized and presented. So thank you so much for attending. Leslie, as some of you may or may not know, is a founding member of nonprofit Utopia. And at some point, we have to get Leslie from behind the scenes to in front of this camera. Hint, hint, Leslie. All righty. So without further ado, I'm going to let you guys go. Take care. Bye-bye.